members just in case they couldn't make it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's recording now. Yeah, it should say at the top left corner.
Awesome. And then we'll get the link after. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, no worries. All right, let's go ahead and get started. And then if anyone joins in, that's fine. I'll just be rambling for the first 10 minutes anyway. So we're gonna focus on general hip mobility today, as well as stabling exercises for the SI joint and pelvic region in general, some of the muscles that support the hips. We are definitely going to be squat focused, but it will be just surrounding the hips in general. We're going to hit a little bit into lower leg stuff. So does anyone know the concept of, I guess like some of you have your cameras off, but concentric contractions and eccentric contractions? Does that sound like familiar? I'll explain it a little bit. So a concentric contraction is when your muscles or a muscle is shortening during the contraction, and then an eccentric contraction is when a muscle is lengthening. That's like the basic concept of what that means. So for example, when you're in a squat, on the way down, let's say, for example, your hip flexors are shortening and contracting, and a little bit of hamstrings with the knees bending as well. And those are concentrically contracting on the way down. And then on the way up, they are eccentrically contracting. So they're still working, but they are lengthening, and it's a lengthening contraction. They're still remaining as stabilizers. And in your squat, so if you come up to a standing position, and I'll face the side just so you can see a little bit better. When you're squatting down, I just want you to really embody this before we begin anything. Come down into a squat with the feet parallel, toes pointing forward, about feet slightly wider than hip distance apart. Good. And on your way down there, you can feel that the hips, there's the space between the torso and the thighs has shortened. That area has shortened, so the hip flexors are contracting. The feet are in a little bit of dorsiflexion, which means the lower leg muscles, the anterior lower leg muscles are contracting as well. And the knees are bent, which means the hamstrings are contracting. And on your way up from the squat, it's a little bit of hip extension and knee extension as well. So the hamstrings and the glutes are contracting on your way up. You can go ahead and take a seat. And we're going to be focusing on these muscles today. One thing that we'll focus on is the hip flexors in particular, because I actually like Dr. Kyle, who some of you may know, he's a part of the recovery team at LP. I really like what he says because I really agree with it. He talks about how the hip flexors, it's such a taboo thing in the therapeutic world to strengthen the hip flexors. And I've always agreed with that because the hip flexors are so tight all the time because we're sitting all day long, most of us, right? Or we just chronically sit, just in general. And because of that, the hip flexors are always in this shortened state. So in the therapeutic world, we're always focusing on stretching the hip flexors, massaging the hip flexors, releasing the hip flexors. But just because a muscle is tight doesn't mean it's strong. And I talk about this all the time, and I think it's a really important concept to grab because it's just because a muscle is tight does not mean it's strong, because you need to develop strength within that muscle and also release it if it's tight. You need to do both of those things, that mobility and that stability, to be able to sustain good function within that muscle and within the surrounding bony structures. So that's really important to know as well. We're going to be focusing on the calves a little bit as well, and the hamstrings, just doing some myofascial release and some like self-massage using the tennis balls. And I think that's all I want to say. I feel like I'm missing something, but it will just come out as we're practicing a bit. Again, feel free to just shout out at any time if you have any questions or if something is hurting and you want to ask if your alignment is correct. Feel free to just unmute yourself. So we're going to start in constructive rest pose, lying down on your mat. So this is a really great pose for the psoas to release, which is a hip flexor. So when you're lying down on your mat here, the feet are gonna be about mat distance apart with the knees bent, and then the knees will knock into touch, and this is called constructive rest pose. And what's great about this is the psoas, which is the major hip flexor in the body, is responsible for hip flexion and a little bit of external rotation. So we are in a little bit of internal rotation right now, and we're passively relaxing the spine. So take a couple of deep breaths here. In and out through the nose, feeling the belly rise as you inhale, and the navel draw towards the spine as you exhale. And feel your glutes decontract here. Feel the hips relax completely. And you might even feel your sacrum, which is at the very base of the spine, start to decompress a little bit here and just allow that kind of opening to happen. Good, we'll take 2 more deep breaths here. Good, and then when you're ready, you can bring the knees so that they point towards the ceiling again, and the feet can be just on the ground, sits bones in line with the heels, and start to rock the knees from left to right. So just a nice passive motion for the lumbar spine, which is the lower back, just getting a little bit of rotation there, getting a little release through the hips. Good, then from there, we'll pick both feet up off the ground and hug both knees in towards your chest. So squeeze the knees in towards you, wrap the arms around the legs. And we'll place one hand on each kneecap and circle the knees apart and back together again. So try and take this action slowly, don't rush through it. Bring the knees apart and then back together again in a circular motion. And then try and go in the opposite direction for a couple of rounds as well. Good. All right, from here, we'll bring the right foot back down to the mat, keep the left knee hugging in towards you, and then grab a hold of the sole of the left foot with the left hand. Good. The right hand can just drop down onto the right hip. So it's kind of like happy baby in yoga, if you've ever heard of that, but it's half happy baby. So what you're going to do, keep that right knee bent and the sole of the foot more or less on the ground, and then start to draw the left knee down towards the floor. It's okay if the right hip lifts up, just let that happen. So the right hip should be slightly lifting up off the ground, the left knee pressing down towards the floor, if not touching the floor. And then press the foot into the hand and the hand into the foot. And find that activation there. You might feel the glutes contract. You might feel an active stretch through the adductors, so the inner thigh muscles on that left side. And then relax that completely. So if you were contracting, just relax, but stay in the posture. Good, then we'll come back to center, hug both knees, and again, wrap the arms around both legs, maybe rock a little bit from left to right. And then we'll switch sides. So hug just the right knee in, place the left sole of the foot down onto the ground, grab a hold of the right foot with the right hand, bringing it into half happy baby. So you're pressing the sole of the foot towards the ceiling, pressing the knee down towards the ground. And really draw that right knee towards the ground as much as you can, even allowing that left hip to lift off the ground to do so. Then from there, we'll add some activation. So press the sole of the right foot into the hand and hand into foot. So you're adding that self-resistance. And you'll feel the glutes contract a little bit. The adductors will be actively stretching. Hold that contraction for a few more seconds. Then relax the contraction, but stay in the pose. Good, then we'll come back to center, hug both knees in, wrap the arms around the legs. Good, just rocking a little bit from left to right. So we're gonna focus a bit more on the adductors. So those inner thigh muscles, you might've felt that active stretch when we were doing the happy baby. We're gonna focus a little bit more on that because the adductors are a really important part. The ad and abductors are a really important part of a squat and just a part of keeping the hips healthy in general. So we're going to be doing a active release, another one for the adductors. So from here, you can bring the feet back down to the mat if they're not already there. Bring the soles of the feet together and the knees wide apart. So you're in a posture called bound angle. And make sure the lower back isn't really arching up off the ground, but it's not completely flattening either. It's somewhere in between. And just notice where you're at in this pose. So notice how low the knees are to the ground. And then that may or may not change after we do this active release. So just pay attention to where they are right now because you're going to notice it afterwards. So as you're ready, press the soles of the feet together as firmly as you possibly can. You'll feel the glutes activate and the inner thighs activate as well. Then from here, try and listen to my instructions carefully. We'll be lifting both knees up simultaneously in 1-inch increments. So you'll lift the knees up 1 inch and hold. Then lift the knees up another inch and hold. Then lift the knees up another inch and hold. And at the same time, keep the soles of the feet pressing together as if your life depends on it, as if there's an important piece of paper between your feet and it's a windy day and you don't want to let it blow away. And the legs might start to shake, and that's totally normal. Just let it happen. Keep lifting in 1-inch increments, and when you can't lift anymore, lower down in 1-inch increments. So lower the knees down 1 inch and hold. Down another inch and hold. The glutes should be contracting the entire time. And unless you have incredibly strong adductors, the legs should be shaking at this point, even if it's just a little bit. Then once you get to the bottom, completely relax everything as if you're about to go to sleep. So you're still in bound angle pose, but you're relaxing the glutes, relaxing the legs. Notice if you're a little bit lower in that bound angle pose. Excuse me, if the knees are a little bit lower down towards the ground. If they're not, that's okay, just notice. And we'll do this one more time. Press the soles of the feet together, really activate here. The hamstrings are activating a little bit, the adductors, the glutes, and then we'll lift the knees up simultaneously in 1-inch increments. Lift 1 inch and hold. I know it seems tedious, just bear with me. Keep going, lift 1 inch and hold. And keep going until you can't anymore, till you reach the top where the feet are about to come apart. And once you're there, lower down in 1-inch increments. Really keep pressing the soles of the feet together. And then once you're at the bottom again, allow the legs to relax completely. The glutes can decontract. And notice where the knees are. Do you feel like this posture is a little bit more comfortable to hold? Did you gain some mobility from that active exercise? Did the knees lower down, even if it's just a centimeter compared to where they were before? Good. When you're ready, we'll lift the knees out of bound angle pose. So bring the feet back down flat on the floor, knees pointing towards the ceiling, and just rock the knees side to side, windshield wiper the legs, just to release out of that. Releasing the lower back. The sacrum gets a little bit compressed with that one, the SI joint area. So we just want to release before we move on to anything else. Awesome. From here, you can hug both knees and wrap the arms around the legs, squeeze the knees in towards you. Good, and then we'll roll over onto one side, or you can rock and roll from the back of the mat to the front of the mat until you come up to a seated position. Awesome. Oh wow, so many more people joined, that's great. Did any of you feel like that bound angle exercise? I know it's kind of a pain to unmute the mic, but did any of you feel like that was an active release? Like you felt like the knees were a little bit closer towards the ground at the end? Yeah, good. All right, getting like a couple thumbs up. All right, so we're going to focus on some internal and external rotation. So when you're in your squat, I know sometimes in squats, we like to do some external rotation squats because that focuses on glute max, right? So glute max is responsible for hip extension and also external rotation of the hips. So if you're wanting to strengthen the glute max, you focus on external rotation of the hips in your squat, right? So we are going to be focusing on a little bit of strengthening of the external hip rotators, because that's also important to keep good form in your squat. So when you're coming down into a squat, if your knees are knocking in, that's not very good alignment. It's not very good for the knees, and you're just not getting the most out of your squat. And over time, you will wear down your knees. So it's really important to focus on external rotators and also focus on the abductors, the abductors, which are glute min and glute med. So we're going to focus on strengthening those guys as well. So we're going to come into a Z pose position next. So basically, I won't mirror you guys, but you'll have your left leg out in front of you and your right leg back behind you, kind of like a 90-90 if you've ever done that. So you can go ahead and come into this position and then I'll give you your next instructions. Awesome, great. I'm gonna just turn off my AC because it's obnoxiously loud. Sorry about that. All right, so once you're in this Z pose position, we're going to do some pelvic tilts, which is really great for resetting the SI joint, which is incredibly important in deadlifts and squats, in basically anything lower body focused. So what you'll do is place your hands like in this L shape and place them in your hip creases. So right kind of where the hips meet the thighs. From there, it's a really subtle movement. You'll arch the lower back, and then you'll round the lower back. So almost like a cat and cow if you've ever done that exercise before, except we're only focusing on the pelvis and the lower back. So arching the lower back and then rounding the lower back. Good, so you're tilting the pelvis forward and tilting the pelvis back. And on the way back, you might feel a little hip flexor stretch on that right side. Good. So if you'll notice here that you can keep going for a couple more rounds with this, but I'll just talk. So the left leg is in some external rotation and the right leg is in some internal rotations. We're kind of focusing on both here for sure. And from the next one, you can just come back to center. We'll place the left hand onto the ground. The right hand is going to grab onto the right thigh, and we'll use that hand to rotate the thigh inward. So you're coming into internal rotation on that right side, and then coming back to center. So you'll almost get a little bit of a twist with the spine as well. Grabbing onto the right thigh, rotate the thigh inward, pulse that right hip forward, squeeze the right side glutes, and then relax the glutes as you come back to center. So this is great for mobilizing the actual hip joint itself. The hip joint is a ball and socket joint, and we are focusing on really rotating that joint here. Good. From the next one, you'll come back to center. We'll do a little bit of a fold so that we're stretching the left side piriformis area. So what you'll do from here is over that left knee, start to walk the hands forward, lowering down onto the elbows, and you should feel a stretch in the outer hip on the left side, maybe even down the side of the leg on the left leg. Just hold that there for a couple of breaths. It's quite similar to a figure 4 stretch if you've ever done that after a workout. Good, and when you're ready, we'll walk the hands back up, coming back up to a neutral spine, and we'll try one more exercise from here, which is my favorite, and then we'll move on to the other side. So this next one is a bit of a challenge. If you have knee issues, especially with that right knee, I wouldn't recommend it whatsoever, as it puts a little bit of pressure on the medial side of that right knee. So if you have knee issues, especially on the right one, just sit out of this one. So what we'll be doing is using the transverse abdominis, which is your deepest layer of abdominals, and it supports your posture, it supports your pelvic floor, and the transverse abdominis is not often strengthened. So when you're doing crunches, for example, you're strengthening mainly the rectus abdominis, which is kind of what you see in abdominals, like the six-pack kind of look. That's your rectus abdominis. The transverse abdominis spans a little bit wider, and it's really important for postural support. So if you didn't have strength in your transverse abdominis, you'd start to hunch over just in your daily life and in your squat. So this focuses on strengthening the hip extensors, so the hamstrings and the glutes, and also the transverse abdominis. So reach the arms out in front of you, and from here, try and really isolate the glutes and the abdominals really slowly as you possibly can. Lift the hips up off of the ground, coming forward, and lifting the hips up so that you're supporting yourself on your shin and on your right knee. It's really challenging. Good. Yep. And slowly lower back down, slowly relaxing the glutes as you come back down. Good. So this is active mobility. We'll do one or two more, just depending on how much you can handle. If you're noticing you're starting to cramp up, it's especially in this heat, muscle spasms and cramps are, I feel like everyone's much more prone to it. So take a break if you need to. And one more if you can handle it. Slowly lifting up. Use your transverse abdominis. Try and move slowly. Squeeze the glutes at the top, just like you would in a squat. And then really relax the glutes slowly as you lower back down. Nice. Awesome. Good. We'll bring the legs back out in front of you and just give the lower back and hips a little bit of a break by windshield, right? Bring the legs from side to side. I'm so not used to teaching like this. It's so quiet. I'm always like cracking jokes in my classes or like workshops. All right, so we'll switch over to the other side. Good. So most of you should have your right leg in front of you, left leg behind, or just whatever side you haven't done yet. Let's start with those pelvic tilts. Take the hands into the hip creases. And we'll tilt the pelvis forward and back. So similar to that cat and cow, you're arching the lower back and then you're rounding the lower back. And you can even kind of tuck the chin as you round back, and you might even get a nice little nerve stretch on the left side. Good. Then we'll come back to center on your next one here. Place the right hand onto the ground just out beside you. Left hand grabs a hold of the left thigh. Rotate that thigh inward, squeeze the left glute, pulse that hip forward, and rotate the spine slightly. And then we'll relax the glutes and come back to center. Okay, continue with that. Rotate the thigh inward. Use the hand to help the rotation. Squeeze the left side glutes. Relax the left side glutes, come back to center. Couple more times, we're rotating the head of the femur, the thigh bone, in the acetabulum, which is the little socket in the pelvis that supports the hip. That makes up the hip joint. Good. Next time you're back to center, we'll stay there. Let's do a little pure forma stretch on that right side by walking the hands out in front of you, just on the diagonal over that right knee. Tucking the chin slightly to just let the head hang heavy, feeling the stretch through the outer hip on the right side. Just take some deep breaths here. Try and relax the upper back. Good, and then walk the hands up, lift the spine back up to neutral, coming out of that, and we'll try our little challenge. So again, if you have a knee issue, especially on the left knee, stay out of this one. But if you're wanting to try it, reach the arms out in front of you, squeeze the glutes and the transverse abdominis. So the transverse abdominis, I kind of like to think of it as a corset because really it is. So act as if you have a corset around your torso and it's cinching in your waist, and slowly lift up. Slowly lower back down, relaxing the glutes slowly as you lower. So it's almost like a somatics exercise because we're focusing on a contraction at the top, squeezing the glutes, and then a slow release and relaxation once you get back down. Maybe trying one more, really slowly lifting up. Good. And really slowly lowering back down. Awesome. And release out of that one. I feel like that one crushes people every time. It's definitely a challenging one. All right. Next, we're going to be coming through just some general spinal mobility and hip mobility. And then we're going to focus a little bit more on kind of gaining mobility within an actual squat. So we'll come to a tabletop position from here. So the shoulders are over the wrists, the hips are over the knees. And we'll just do a couple rounds of cat and cow here just because it's really great for the spine and pelvis. So on the inhalation, drop the belly down, lift the chest forward, arch the back. And with the exhalation, press the ground away, tuck the tailbone under, draw the belly button towards the spine, round the back. Inhales, drop the belly down, lift the sits bones up, chest forward. And exhales, tuck the chin in towards the chest as you round the back. So focus not only on your spine moving here, but also your pelvis. Notice how just like when we were in the 90-90 sit or the Z pose sit, when we were doing the pelvic tilts, you're basically doing a pelvic tilt here, but you're just adding more of the spine into the movement. Good, we'll come back to a neutral position. From here, we'll just do a little bit of hip circumduction, so moving the hip through a whole circle. Let's lift the left knee up off of the ground, just hovering it an inch away from the ground. And then we'll abduct the hip by keeping that left leg at a 90-degree angle, but bringing it out to the side, like fire hydrant pose. Good. Awesome. Try and keep the weight even between the hands here. It's a little bit more difficult. You'll feel your abdominals contract. Then we'll take each movement as a separate movement. So from here, squeeze that left knee towards the left elbow. Good, kind of contracting the side waist. And then we'll close off the hip, hug the knee towards the nose, round the spine, kind of like cat pose. Then we'll focus on some hip extension here by pressing the sole of the foot towards the ceiling, lifting the chest. And then bringing the leg back out into fire hydrant pose, out to the side with abduction. Good, hugging the knee towards the elbow, same side elbow. Knee towards the nose, round the spine, close the hip. Keep the hips square, press the foot towards the ceiling. Good, and then abduction, taking the knee out to the side. Awesome, continue just like that for one more round at your own pace. Good, then from here, we'll keep that knee hovering, but we'll step the foot towards the top of your mat, but the outside edge of the mat. So you want both hands on the inside edge of the foot into a lunge position. Awesome, great. So this is lizard lunge. The left foot and the right knee are pretty far apart, like they're on separate tracks, parallel to one another. And you're pressing the hips forward. You might feel a hip flexor stretch already on the right side. From here, really start to stabilize the transverse abdominis, so cinching in as if there's a corset around your torso. Press the top of the right foot into the ground and see if you can lift the knee up off the ground. Just lift the right knee up off the ground. Pressing the hips forward so that you're feeling the hip flexors really get that nice stretch on the right side. Good, we'll lower the knee down, the right knee down. Awesome. From here, we'll focus on a little bit more external rotation through the front leg. So we're going to roll onto the outside edge of the left foot, pressing the knee out to the side. Good. You should feel a stretch in the left outer hip. Awesome. Holding here for a couple of breaths. Good. And then from here, we'll place the left sole of the foot back down onto the mat. So you're bringing the knee back up. And take that left foot and bring it on a 45-degree angle, just like you would if you were doing some external rotation squats. We'll tuck the right toes under, lift the right knee up off of the ground, and slowly step forward with the right foot into a squat. So you're keeping the squat low. Both feet are at a 45-degree angle. So the heels are slightly inward, toes are slightly outward. Good. You can bring the hands together, either clasping them together or just somewhere near the chest. And you can bring the elbows to the insides of the knees. So I'll show you guys from the front here. The elbows are on the insides of the knees, and you're using the elbows to press the knees out. So you should feel a nice stretch through the inner thighs here. Good, we'll focus on a little bit of activation. So what you'll do here is squeeze the knees into the elbows and press the elbows into the knees. So you're resisting yourself. Amazing, hold that contraction, and then relax the contraction and just sit down in the squat. Good, so we'll try that one more time. So squeeze the inner knees towards the elbows, elbows into the inner knees, resisting yourself, and then relax. Good, from here, we're gonna really slowly stand up. So we'll bring the arms out in front, press the knees out so you're rolling onto the outside edges of the feet, and slowly lift up to standing as slowly as you possibly can. Awesome, great. All right, from here, we'll slowly lower back down. So keep the feet as they are, slowly lower back down into the squat. A little bit easier on the way down. We'll place the hands onto the mat, and this time step the left foot back. So we're coming to the lunge on the other side. The hands are on the inside edge of the right foot. Awesome, just getting the hips and the body used to this lunge position. So just hanging out here for a few breaths. Good, then from here, we're pressing the top of the left foot down into the mat and lifting the left knee up off the ground just an inch or two. Awesome, keep pressing the hips forward. Good, then we'll lower that left knee down and start to roll onto the outside edge of the right foot, pressing the right knee out to the side. So we're externally rotating the right hip. Great. Good, from here, we'll lower that right foot back down, bring the knee back up to center, and step the right knee back so we're coming into this tabletop position again. So shoulders over wrists, hips over knees, and just rock the hips a little bit from side to side. And then we'll come into a child's pose from here with external rotation in the hips. So bring the knees out about as wide as the mat, big toes to touch, send the hips back towards the heels, and rest down here. So you can lower down onto the elbows. Maybe lower the forehead down to the mat if it reaches. A couple of breaths here, just allowing the lower back to stretch and release in this child pose. Good, then when you're ready, we'll press up out of the child's pose and just come to a seated position, and I'll explain where we're going next. So we're gonna be using the tennis balls or therapy balls next. As I mentioned earlier, maybe some of you weren't here, but we are focusing on all parts of a squat. So when you're coming down into the squat, into a squat, your feet are in dorsiflexion, which is kind of this action of the ankle here. This is plantar flexion, that's dorsiflexion. And that requires a certain amount of give from the calves, which is comprised mainly of the gastrocs muscle and the soleus muscle. and then a little bit in the hamstrings too. So the hamstrings are responsible for hip extension and knee flexion. And what's really, as a group, and what's really interesting about a squat is they are concentrically contracting and eccentrically contracting on the way down, and then concentrically contracting on the way up, because you're bending your knees as you're coming down to the squat, so the hamstrings are working a little bit, and then on the way up, they're definitely working with that hip extension. So we're going to target the calves and the hamstrings at the same time. You're going to grab a hold of your tennis ball, and we're going to place it. It's kind of bringing some mobility into the knee as well. So you're going to place that tennis ball behind the right knee. So really just in the knee pit, basically. Good. From there, the left leg can just be wherever it's comfortable. Don't worry too much about it. Clasp the hands onto the right shin. Really sitting up on the sit bones so the spine is nice and tall. And we're bringing the right heel towards the right sit bone as much as you can. Good. Keep the spine drawing up tall. And if you have any trigger points in this area, you might feel some referral pain. It's totally normal as long as you don't get any like burning or numbness or tingling. If you get any of that, definitely stop. Then from here, to do an active release, we'll focus on some plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So with the right foot, see if you can lift the foot up off the ground so just the heel is on the ground. So you're bringing the toes towards the shin bone. Good. And then from here, placing the toes back down onto the ground and lifting the heel up off the ground. Awesome. So that's where the calves are going to be contracting there. Good. And then keep going back and forth between lifting the toes up off the ground, flexing the toes towards the shin, and then lifting the heel up off the ground. You can keep going there. And the hamstrings are kind of just along for the ride. They're getting some nice compression at the kind of distal aspect. And then when you're ready, you can take the tennis ball or therapy ball and bring it down a few inches. So we're still working with the same exercise. We're just working a little bit lower through the calf muscles and a little bit higher through the hamstrings. So slide the ball down a little bit. Still bring the heel as close to the sit bone as you can while maintaining integrity through the spine. And try and lift the toes up off the ground and then the heel up off the ground. It's actually a really great one to do at the wall. If you have two tennis balls, I'll just explain it. Maybe you can try it later. And you're placing, you guys can keep going as I'm talking. You're placing both tennis balls kind of behind the knee, and then or behind the knees, one behind each knee, and then you're at the wall and you're bringing the heels to the ground and lifting the heels up off of the ground and coming onto the toes. And it's a little bit more intense because you're in a squat and you're working a bit more actively. Good. When you're ready, you can release out of that and just shake out that right leg. Maybe even take your thumbs and massage the right calf a little bit. Just see if any adhesion was broken up there. Brings a lot of blood flow to the area by massaging with a tennis ball. And then we'll switch to the other side. So place the tennis ball or therapy ball behind the left knee, bringing the heel in towards the glutes, sitting up nice and tall, and then the right leg can just be as it is. And then we'll lift the toes up off the ground and then the heel up off the ground. And you might notice that one side is particularly tighter compared to the other side, and that's pretty normal. We all have functional and postural imbalances that keep one side stronger and one side tighter than the other side. Good. And then after a couple of rounds there, you can slide the therapy ball down a little bit lower and then keep going. And you might notice for some people, it's a little bit more intense in the first position, or it's a little bit more intense when you're lower down through the calf. And both the gastrocs and the soleus muscle, which kind of make up the calves, tendonize into the Achilles tendon. So sometimes we think of the Achilles tendon as just like this separate entity, but really it's the calf muscles kind of coming to a close. So if ever you're dealing with tight calves, it's kind of nice to take your thumbs and just press into the Achilles tendon, literally just give it some compression. And there's a whole theory around just that's highly used actually in a lot of healthcare practices, where you're just working with the tendon. You're just massaging and compressing the tendon of a muscle, and that releases the entire muscle belly. All right, when you're ready, you can release from there and just shake out the legs. Yeah, so if you're ever dealing with tight calves, just simply grab the thumbs and press into the Achilles tendon and just give it some compression, give it a little bit of massage. You might notice that that actually affects the muscle belly higher up, which is really interesting. So next we're going to be working with some somatics. So we'll work with some hip somatics. This gets a little bit boring sometimes, so I want to take a second to kind of explain why it's important. So somatics is working with repatterning the nervous system. So I'll give you a little example. We're supposed to have complete somatic control over our muscles, meaning if I want to shrug my shoulder up to my ear, I can tell my brain to do that and my body does it. But sometimes, let's say, for example, it's the best example I like to give, if you're just at a computer all day long or whatever you're doing in your life, that stress that shrugs your shoulders up to your ears consistently, you almost lose somatic control over contracting your upper traps. And then when you come home at the end of the day, it's really hard to get your shoulders away from your ears. And even though you're supposed to have somatic control, you're supposed to be able to tell your muscles to contract and relax, you've lost that control because you're over contracting or consistently contracting a certain muscle or muscle group. So the upper traps is quite honestly the best example because we all do it. We all squeeze our shoulders up to our ears with stress, with bad posture, and then we all deal with tight upper traps and have to go to an RMT. So when you lose somatic control over a muscle or muscle group, then your muscles have a hard time relaxing. So you have a hard time getting your shoulders away from your ears. So somatics works with repatterning your nervous system, repatterning that channel that tells your muscle to contract and to relax. So what you're doing, for example, and I'll just give you an example of what we'll be doing, is we're going to be working with the hip external rotators and also the hip abductors and internal rotators. So everything that's really important for squats and lunges and everything. So if I'm, for example, coming into a clamshell and I'm telling my muscles like my glute max, for example, and my deep intrinsic, my deep external hip rotators to contract, and then I'm lowering the knee back down and I'm telling them to completely relax. And that's the most important part, is completely relaxing the muscles at the end of the exercise before lifting back up into it. We're working with repatterning that channel of the muscles contracting and relaxing. And at the same time, we're building stability, but we're also just changing the function of these muscles in general. That was a lot. If you have any questions, just unmute and let me know. I hope that makes sense. So So we'll lie down onto our side. So lie down onto your left side to start. And what you'll be doing here is coming into a double 90-degree angle. So you really want to make sure your shoulders are completely in line with the hips, and the hips are in line with the knees, and the knees are in line with the ankles. Good. The shoulders being in line with the hips is really important. You want your pelvis to be stacked. So the right hip is stacked over top of the left hip completely. The lower back is neither in extension or flexion, it's just neutral. From there, we'll keep the soles of the feet glued together as if there's an elastic band on the ankles, and just lift the top knee away from the bottom knee. You'll want to do this in a really small motion as to not rotate the right hip back. The pelvis is remaining stacked at all times, even if you take the right hand and place it on the back of the pelvis. Then slowly lower that knee back down. And once the knees regain contact, completely relax everything as if you're about to go to sleep. Relax the whole body. Then lift back up again. So the slower you do this, the more impactful it will be for your nervous system. We're not taking this as an exercise to strengthen glute med, or this is a typical exercise for strengthening glute med. We're taking this as a repatterning exercise. Contracting once you get to the top, slowly lowering the knee back down, relaxing the knees once they're together, completely relaxing the glutes, and then lifting back up again. The more you relax completely at the bottom of the exercise before lifting the knee back up, the more effective it will be. Sometimes we tend to overtrain certain muscles, and that's why somatics is a really great practice, because we're still focusing on stability. Your muscles are still contracting, but we're also focusing on repatterning. So if a muscle is hypertonic, which means it's too tight or overly tight, this will focus on releasing it. We'll do one more. Next time the knees are back together, stay there, completely relax the entire body. Take a full deep breath in and out. All right, our next one is a little bit less of a contraction, but it's still important to focus on the contraction and then the release. We'll keep the knees together, lift the top foot away from the bottom foot. So the knees are glued together, top foot lifts. You'll feel that hip internally rotating. And we'll lower the foot back down. Once the feet are touching again, relax the entire body. And then lift the foot back up again. Good. And really make sure you're isolating. So if you feel your left hip, which this can happen, sneakily contracting the glutes of the left side, sneakily contracting to help support this movement, just reset, relax the body, and try and only focus on the right side. This is a really good practice for isolation, because sometimes our body likes to contract things that shouldn't be contracting in a certain movement or exercise, and compensating, basically, which is definitely not what we want. All right, one more with this. Then the next time the feet regain contact, completely relax the entire body. Okay, we're gonna do one last one. It's really important you make sure to stack the hips for this last one. So this is pure abduction of the right hip. Try and keep the ankle and knee in alignment with one another. Lift the entire top leg away from the bottom leg. Make sure the hip doesn't rotate back at all. So even if it's just lifting a foot, and then slowly lowering back down, completely relaxing everything at the bottom, and then lifting back up again. And a lot of these exercises seem very tedious, I know. Please bear with me, because we are going to do a little bit of a retest at the end where we come back into a squat, and you'll see if your function is a little bit better. If the left hip is sneakily contracting, try and relax it. Try and isolate the right side. Let's do one more. Good. Relax the entire body. Take a full breath in and out. Good, then we'll switch sides. So slowly make your way onto the other side. Let's see what time we're at. All right, a couple more minutes. And when you're lying down on your other side, make sure that you focus on your alignment before we start anything. So make sure the knees are in line with the hips, ankles are in line with the knees, and most importantly, the shoulders are in alignment with the hips. First exercise, keep the feet glued together. Lift the top knee away from the bottom knee. Slowly lower back down. Once you get to the bottom, completely relax everything before even thinking about lifting that knee back up. So now that you know what you're doing a little bit because you did it on the other side, see if you can focus on the mechanics of this movement. What is happening? What is contracting? What joints are articulating to make this movement happen? See if you can really get in tune with your body. Try not to let the right hip contract at all. Try and keep the right hip relaxed. And do one or two more with this. Good. And the next time you relax back down, just take a full breath in and out. Good. Then we'll keep the knees glued together here. Lift the top foot away from the bottom foot. So we're focusing on internal rotation of that left hip. When the feet regain contact, relax everything, and then lift the left foot up again, keeping the knees glued together. Good. The next time the feet touch, just relax the entire body before we move on to the last exercise in this series. And when you're ready, we'll do that pure hip abduction, abduction. So we'll keep the knee and ankle in alignment. Lift the top leg away from the bottom leg. Try not to lift too high. You want to keep the pelvis stacked. Slowly lower the leg back down. Relax everything before lifting back up again. Really slow, mindful movements here. Two or three more with this one. Good, then once you're done, completely relax at the bottom. Take a full breath in and out. Awesome, and then slowly make your way on up to a seated position. Great. So I know that one was a little bit tedious. I actually want you guys to come up to a standing position and just experience the hips as they are right now. So you can take a couple hip circles here. Maybe even take just a relaxed forward fold. And then try coming into a squat the way you normally would, And see if just your function's a little bit better. The knees and the hips feel a little bit better here. See if it feels easier to keep the knees stacked over the ankles. Awesome. All right. I want to do one more rolling exercise because we haven't got the chance to do many of those today. So take your tennis ball. We'll come to a seated position. Let's just roll out. Okay, let's roll out the top of the glutes. So like glute med and min. So the glutes, glute med, max and min, max, med, and min, all kind of originate from the pelvis. So from the pelvic crust, and then they insert into different areas. So glute max inserts into the IT band. Glute med and min insert into the greater trochanter, which is kind of like this bony structure on the femur. So we don't think of the glutes as originating from such a high area, but they do originate from quite high up. So we are wanting to start this exercise, let's say on the right side. You want to be kind of right at the hip crest area, so you can feel where the meaty area of your glutes stops, and that's where you want to be. So it's quite high up, and you want to be beside the sacrum, so beside the spine. We'll stay in a seated position, and actually we'll come into a lying down position, sorry for this one. So you'll want to be right at the top of the glutes there where they begin on the right side, let's say beside the spine, beside the sacrum. Then from there, you'll lower the right knees, you'll lower both knees down to the right side, and you'll feel the therapy ball slide across the very top of the glutes to the outside of the hip. And then as you bring the knees back to center, the therapy ball will slide back to center towards the spine. And we'll keep going with that. Lower the knees over to the right side. Allow the therapy ball to slide across the top of the glutes. Bring the knees back to center. Therapy ball slides back to center. So a couple more times. If you lower the knees over to the right side, the therapy ball slides over to that side, and you feel a tight spot that feels like a trigger point, hang out there for a minute. So you can do your own trigger point release here with these therapy balls or with a tennis ball, which is really cool. It's basically why most of us will go to RMTs, is they'll look for trigger points, which is kind of a tender or tight nodule within a muscle belly, and basically like a knot, quote unquote, and they'll press into it, and that will release it. So you can do that yourself here. If you find a tight area, a tender nodule, you can hold onto that spot. You can even work with some contraction and release. So if the knees are over to the right side and you find a trigger point, finding that tight spot, you can squeeze the glutes together and then relax the glutes. And try that 2 or 3 times. Squeeze the glutes together and then relax them. And notice if each and every time you can feel the therapy ball almost digging in a little bit deeper every time you relax. So keep rolling in and around this area. As long as you're not going right into like the gluteal cleft, you should be pretty safe here. So there's not much damage that you can do. So keep rolling in and around the meaty area of the glutes. And then once you're ready, you can slide that tennis ball out from underneath you and just allow the sacrum and the spine to reset on the ground, just lying down on your back, knees pointing up to the ceiling. And then we'll switch over to the other side when you're ready. So over to the left side, the therapy ball should be right at the top of the glutes, so probably higher than you think. You can feel for the meaty area where it ends. That's how high you want to be. Beside the sacrum. And then you're going to be rolling by rocking the knees over to the left side, allowing the therapy ball to slide across the top of the glutes to the outer hip. And then back to center, knees point towards the ceiling, and therapy ball slides towards the sacrum. So keep going with that. The therapy ball, maneuvering it across the top of the glutes by shifting the hips. Knees rock over to the left, knees come back to center. And then the next time you rock the knees over to the left side, the therapy ball is closer to the outside of the glute. Try and find a tender spot. Try and find a tight area and simply hold and compress onto that tight area. Might feel a little intense, so take some deep breaths. And then you can even try and play with that contraction and release, so squeezing the glutes together and relaxing the glutes while staying on that tight area. Squeezing the glutes together, relaxing the glutes. And then just a little bit of freestyle, just rolling around this glute area, this meaty area, rolling side to side, rolling in little circles around a tight spot. Again, you can't do much wrong here. And then releasing the tennis ball out from underneath you, placing the sacrum back down onto the mat, knees pointing to the ceiling. Just resetting the spine. When you're ready, you can hug the knees in towards you, wrap the arms around the legs, squeeze the knees in towards the chest, rock a little bit left to right perhaps. And then make your way on up to a seated position. Awesome. All right, I think that's all the time. Wow, is it exactly 8 o'clock? That's perfect. I think that's all the time that we have for today. I'll be around for the next few minutes or so. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want to unmute and just chat, that's totally fine. I think I totally forgot to mention my name. So my name is Iysha, by the way. And if you want to just do a couple squats and lunges even now, just to test and retest, you can kind of see if you feel a little bit better, if your hips feel better, if your spine feels better, if your knees feel better. Even try just walking around like your home or your apartment, just really just walking from one end of the room to the other end of the room and focusing on your gait, so how you're walking, and notice if that feels a little bit better compared to the beginning of class. If you have any questions about anything we did as well, you could reach out to Adam and Michelle, and I'm sure they'll pass along the questions to me if you're not wanting to ask right now. And I think that's it.
That was awesome.
I'm glad.
What felt great at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like ending with rolling the top of the glutes. It feels so good.
Good or bad?
Yeah, that was sensitive for us.
Yeah, I bet you guys have been doing a lot of biking, right?
Yes, exactly. We've been noticing it kind of building up exactly there, like glute med.
Yeah.
Pop. And just, yeah, crazy. But that was good. And crazy how some of that stability, like activation work released so much for us, which was great.
Yeah, I feel like that's the thing that a lot of people are so surprised with, like the bound angle one where we're lifting up the knees and then lowering them down. I feel like that's that one, and a couple others like the somatics just gets like the biggest surprise from people. People are like, wow, I didn't know that activation could help me actually release. And it really kind of puts into perspective how like stability and mobility are really related and interconnected, which I love. Yeah.
A lot of the programs that are available are all focused on flexibility, right? And
yeah,
missing out on that whole stability component, which is so important.
It totally is. And yeah, like I was saying at the beginning, like I've seen Kyle post about it as well, how it's so completely taboo to strengthen the hip flexors in the therapy worlds. Like you'll never see, or very rarely see, like a physios focus a lot on therapeutic exercise, prescribe a hip flexor strengthening exercise, which I totally don't understand, because I'm like, just because we're sitting all day long and the hip flexors are getting tight doesn't mean they're getting stronger. We need to stabilize and release to be able to maximize function, you know? So it's really interesting.
Yeah, we just stretch them, but we forget to create stability in the new end range.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we see most at the gym is when people lose range of motion as the weight increases. It's because not because of their lack of flexibility. They can do a full air squat, but
Okay.
then when they add resistance, the range gets less and less
Right.
because they lose that strength, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
stability. So super cool to do some of that. And then the nervous system stuff, that was cool. The bottom leg kept firing like it wanted to help.
Yeah. Big time. Big time. And we forget about that. Like, I actually forget to cue that sometimes. And I can't forget to cue it because it's so important to isolate. And it's so funny how like the body just compensates and everything just wants to like jump in and help out. And it's funny how we're supposed to have somatic control over these things, but we just completely lose it. We lose that proprioception. We lose that body awareness. We lose that somatic control over our muscles. And I actually love somatics for that reason. Like, it's probably why a couple of years ago when I was introduced to it, I pretty much like stopped practicing yoga or teaching it for probably since then, like traditional yoga, just because I was like, why am I doing this? It's so crazy.
You need to have both. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an eye opener for us.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of work we did, but yeah, pretty cool. What were we working on? The abductors, right? For the most part.
Yeah, like glute med and min primarily, because those glute med and min are internal rotators and abductors, abductors.
Okay.
Yeah.
But maybe that's why I think about my internal rotation sometimes, and maybe a tight glute med and min would prevent some internal rotation.
Yeah. So
No, maybe not.
definitely. Well, no, probably more external rotators. So like, I mean, typically, right? So if you think about like elbow flexion, let's say like my brachialis, my biceps are contracting. If my triceps, let's say, are tight, then that's going to prevent the flexion, even like shoulder flexion as well, because they're responsible for a little bit of that, like brachialis and biceps. So it would probably be like your external rotators that are tight, which makes sense because like a lot of people's external rotators are tight, like piriformis and all of those guys, like your deep six. So like the ones, because you have your glute max, med and min, and then underneath that all you have piriformis, superior gemelli, inferior gemelli, obturator internus, obturator externus, and quadratus. So like the deep six, just all of those. But they all do external rotation as well as glute max. So if you're having trouble with internal rotation, it's probably your glute max, just by like what I think you probably do in workouts. I don't know, but it's probably your glute max, because a lot of people overtrain glute max, like especially in squats. Like when we're coming into an external rotation squat and then coming up, glute max is firing so much, and people tend to squeeze their glutes and over contract glute max in workouts, just in daily life with stress. So glute max is like overworked, and it's also super tight, which is why then like a lot of people have pelvic instability, because like glute med is not strong enough, which leads to the pelvis being unstable, because glute med and min really like keep the pelvis stable. And then when one of glute med or min is like tight, or sorry, weak, that's what I meant to say, weak, then you'll have like a lateral pelvic shift, if that makes sense. So like if I'm standing on one leg, my left glute med and min are supposed to be working to keep my pelvis stable. My camera is actually tilted, that's why I'm a little bit tilted. But if my glute med and min on that left side are weak, I'm gonna be like this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Cool. That was awesome. Thank you for just focusing so much on the squat today.
Yeah, of course.
Our clients have a hard time relating a lot of the mobility unless it's really focused on something.
Right.
That was awesome to really do that.
Yeah, I kind of liked that. Like we could do that more often, like focus it on something that your clients could relate to, like improving your squat or improving your lunge or improving anything, improving your manufacturing.
Anything overhead even.
Yeah. We could definitely work on like how to maximize shoulder flexion without completely killing your back and throwing it into extension.
That's very common.
Yeah.
Very common. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you so much. We're going to share that link. What we've been trying to do is add all of these to our blog page.
Cool. That's exciting.
And then we're able to share them kind of we just kind of do a quick summary and then share the blog post as a whole, which is awesome.
Nice. That's awesome.
We couldn't really hear your air conditioning, so I hope you aren't like dying because you turned it off.
I'm totally dying. That's why like my brain is fried. I'm like, can't even talk properly.
You could hear it, but we couldn't hear it.
Oh, I'm glad we have like cameras up there. I can show you. We have like completely exposed ceilings.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So you can really hear it because all of our vents and pipes and everything are just
totally open.
All right, I'll let you guys go. Have a good night, and thanks for coming. That was super nice.
Talk soon, okay?
Okay, bye.
See ya.